Since the beginning of the existence of auto racing, there have been many compilations and conversations regarding crashes. The different variants of topics regarding crashes range from the biggest to the most controversial to the worst to how a crash affected, well, insert racer here, basically all of them. With so many racing series that exist or have existed, those types of conversations can exist in any racing circle. Recently, because reasons, I have been looking up some old school ASA races. The American Speed Association. Back when TNN existed, ASA was one of the most known and beloved stock car racing series, and is finally remembered today amongst old school racing fans. Though its reach wasn't as big as NASCAR's, it definitely has a popular history with all of the champions and legends that you know of today that came from it. Admittedly, I recall discovering the ASA series in the late 1990s, and Gary St. Amant is the driver I most associate with ASA during that time I watched it and was familiar with it. Now, what do these two topics have in common? Well, the ASA races I was looking up were from the early 1990s. In the midst of doing that search, though, I finally found the race that featured the most infamous crash in ASA history. Despite it being from ASA, it became pretty famous in the NASCAR rounds very quickly for a multitude of reasons for years to come, and is still a famous and/or infamous topic when brought up today. Since I know most of you don't know much about the original ASA series, I will do a storytime video on this race, and then I want you to guess which wreck from this race was the infamous crash in question. So here we go. This is my story of the 1992 Players Limited 200, the race that features the most infamous crash in ASA history. This race took place at the Cayuga Speedway in Ontario, Canada. Rain had been a factor all weekend. Despite that, qualifying was not rained out, and the points leader, John Benson Jr., won the pole. The race starts, and Scott Hansen quickly falls in second ahead of Tony Raines as he tries to chase down John Benson Jr. Leighton Rees has issues early in the portions of the first run. As the top two separated themselves from the rest of the field and started encountering lap traffic, other drivers were highlighted during the broadcast. Hansen showed a lot of aggression towards Benson. Jim Cooper spun on track, and a caution came out as a result. The restart was on lap 20, and
ready to go back to green flag racing. It flutters, and away the field. Oh, and Benson is in trouble. Johnny Benson does not save it. Gets into the outside wall. The leader has crashed here at Cayuga. Oh, what an alarming set of circumstances. It happened so suddenly, I did not have an opportunity to see if he was helped or he simply lost control. There is the shot from inside the Benson car. He looks a little stunned. Maybe it's just unhappiness, Rob.
Well, I think it's a combination of certainly unhappiness, and he took a hard shot against that retaining wall. It had to have knocked the breath out of this points leader, the guy who had appeared to be invincible in the early part of the season. Now, there's the crew chief. That's Chris Bradley. And I don't think it's so much maybe anger as it is concern for his driver. He stays in the pit area, and he's in radio communication with Johnny.
What a graphic shot that was. That was terrific, seeing the crew chief talking to his driver on the racetrack. You see John is pretty calm as he sits there trying to refire the car, but just a sudden shocking turn of events here as John Benson, who has just dominated this series for the past month, suddenly finds himself in the marbles on the outside of the track. Once he got up there, he couldn't save it.
Well, it'll be interesting, hopefully, to get another view of that. It's almost reminiscent of Memorial Day and watching some open-wheeled race cars down in central Indiana on restarts. Let's see if there's contact.
Here it is. Yeah, let's see. There's Benson, maybe a quarter of a lane up. No, he tucks it back down.
You could see the tail end of the car get airborne. I think Benson was trying to tiptoe into the corner, and Hansen just got into the back of him. Certainly not a... Now watch. I think if we can see this again, we're going to see well, it's a little bit late, but I saw the tail end of that car just get a little bit up in the air before he got out of control, and I think he was just nudged from behind. And when it's slick, just a little bit out of the racing group, that's all it takes.
Yeah, the track still doesn't have the tackiness to it that a paved surface has in a hot summer day. And a combination of the little bit of moisture that's on it, particularly out of the groove, and getting up into the dirt and the debris on the outside of the racing lane, you got a problem. Ralph?
Well, we got Chris Bradley with him, his crew chief. Chris, what did he say took place?
Just says Scott got in the back of him there on the restart.
Well, the car's coming by us now. Does he make it sound like possibly it's fixable?
It's going to be tough. The best we can do is just get it out there and hopefully get a few points.
Chris Bradley, a frustrated Chris Bradley, the crew chief for Johnny Benson.
Well, Ralph, while you were interviewing Chris down there, under yellow, Jim Cooper went out. You see a wrecker right there in corner number 2, and there's a car in the infield. Jim Cooper spun out trying to catch back up to the tail of the field, so that's Cooper's second spin.
And car number 53, Scott Hansen, came on pit road and the hood went up. So I think there very well could have been some very incidental and unintentional contact between Benson and Hansen. And as Scott Hansen's car number 53 came by the start-finish line that time, it did appear that there was a little bit of red paint on the front end. Look at them taping it up. Yeah, there's been contact, no doubt about it.
Well, Ralph, I understand you may have another observation or perhaps an eyewitness account or somebody's opinion as to what happened down there.
Well, the opinion is of Howie Letow, the crew chief for Scott Hansen. He had an opportunity to talk to Scott on the radio, and he said to Scott, what happened? And Scott said he pushed the brake pedal all the way to the floor, and there were no brakes to stop the number 53, and that's why he went right into the back of Johnny Benson.
Well, an explanation as to what happened, but Rob, you were right. I mean, it wasn't that much of a collision, but at these speeds, the subtlest of taps will send you out of control.
Scott Hansen had some sort of brake issue that resulted in his car hitting John Benson Jr.'s car, resulting in him crashing. Okay, you literally heard Ralph Sheheen call him by his more common name that you all know him by anyway, so I'll refer to him by the name most of you know him as from here on out. Anyway, the onboard shown shows he was completely fine. When the car returns to the garage area, Johnny helps out the crew with repairs. However, his car in the end was unable to continue in this race. Meanwhile, the brake issue results in Scott pitting as Jim Cooper has issues under caution. Afterwards, the restart was on lap 27, as Larry Newber says,
My goodness, your timing at home is good. You return from the kitchen and the green flag flies, and Tony Raines, who has been anticipating at win number 1 in ASA competition for about a season and a half right now, finds it within his grasp.
Okay then. Anyway, Tony Raines ends up as the leader with Tim Steele second, and they had a pretty good battle. Tom Jones has an issue shortly after the restart and came to pit road. Meanwhile, there was a multitude of great battles going around the track. However, all that ended when this happened.
Yellow comes out, and we have a massive pileup. Where are we at? Over in corner number 3, between 3 and 4.
Unfortunately, Glenn Allen Jr., the sandwich, he's the meat between the two pieces of bread. Tim Steele, or Tim Fedewa, rather, the bright yellow car number 55, and rookie driver John Freeman in car number 16. Now, also you can see just to the right, Mac McClellan has spun, but it does not appear as if he's had any contact.
Here's the end of it.
Well, you know what happened. It looks to me like perhaps John Freeman may have spun in front of Glenn Allen Jr. and the 55 machine of Tim Fedewa. Again, that's purely conjecture.
Tim Fedewa, Glenn Allen Jr., and John Freeman all collided as Mac McClellan spun to avoid colliding with all of them. The actual cause of the crash was John Freeman spinning, and while trying to avoid him, Glenn Allen Jr. spun, and that resulted in Tim Fedewa trying to go to the high side to avoid both spinning cars, just to get squished. Under caution, Scott Hansen pits again. Tim Fedewa tells Glenn Allen Jr. that, like Scott Hansen beforehand, he had brake issues. Raines and Steele still remain 1-2 in the race. However, Raines has an issue as smoke appears from his car. Raines' crew chief was interviewed, and he says he believes the smoke is just from the right rear tire. Meanwhile, concerns of rain became reality as a caution was thrown for rain. Jim Cooper and Mac McClellan both pit under caution. Now, for the footage I found of this race, laps 79 to 84 are missing. Based on the commentary I heard, assumingly, There was a red flag for rain, and the ASA officials made Tony Raines come to pit road due to the smoke, because on the restart, Tim Steele was in the lead. Tom Forbes tried to pass Tim Steele for the lead before the halfway point with more rain and missed on the way. Mike Eddy is on the charge after pitting before the red flag. The battle for the lead between Tim Steele and Todd Forbes continued, but another crash disrupted that.
As we have a yellow flag.
We have a crash, Ralph, on the back straightaway. Donnie Zwiefel and Dennis Lampman have come together at the midpoint of the backstretch. There was definitely contact, damage to both cars. Lampman most significantly to the left front.
And Bob Seneker, Tony Raines were dangerously close to being caught up in that incident. Of course, both of those drivers had been in just before resuming green flag racing conditions. That's the car number 35 of Donnie Zwiefel.
Now, these yellow flag laps will count, and no, the Wins Halfway Challenge will not be won under yellow. It's the driver who leads the third lap after we go green who is the winner of the Wins Halfway Challenge. Rob, here's what it looked like a little earlier. Well, it's already happened. Donnie is sideways right in the middle of back straightaway. And where's Dennis at? Oh, he was right behind him.
Well, two Dennises right there.
Yeah.
Vogel
Dennis,
into the high side,
yeah.
and Lampman, unfortunately, with no place to go, tears both right and left front corners off the body of car number 9.
Vogel in the yellow and blue number 51 got on the binders. Yeah.
Ooh. Here comes Seneker. He squeezes by on the high side.
And there goes Tony Roper by. And Anspaugh and Wendy. There's Dennis Lampman trying to stay on the lead lap. Now he'll make an effort here to duck into the pits. That's why he's passing cars on the inside. He's going to the pitting lane. There's Zwiefel.
Donnie Zwiefel and Dennis Lampman had a collision on the backstretch. Under the caution, a few drivers pitted, including Bob Seneker and Tony Raines. The restart was just past halfway, and Tim Steele was still leading. Steele was trying to pull away. However,
we've got a couple of cars together over on the backstretch. Jerry Foyt and the number 15 machine, a couple of rookies, Todd Oliver, and that's the reason you see the car slowing down on the racetrack.
And it looks like Lampman was involved again, too, or maybe he was just taking evasive action. Just as this yellow flag came out, we were beginning to get into the Wins Halfway Challenge. The winner, by the way, of this week's Wins Halfway Hot Shot Challenge is a deal as we look at Dennis Lampman, who is making this day longer, not that it's already long enough. Tim Steele, for winning this week's Hot Shot Halfway Challenge, wins $500 from Wins Oil for leading at the halfway point of today's race. Boy, lots of confusion. This is not what you'd call your typical race.
Dennis Lampman has another problem, and according to the commentary, Jerry Foyt and Todd Oliver also has issues, all which caused the caution to come out again. The restart this time was on lap 111 with Tim Steele getting a good jump. Todd Forbes eventually did chase Tim Steele down. Meanwhile, the battle for third also heats up a bit, with Jay Sauter now being on the move. Mike Eddy on fresher tires also joins in the battle. Back up front, Todd Forbes and Tim Steele still continue their incredible battle while also dealing with lap traffic.
Fourth and fifth, Jay Sauter looking for win number 1. Todd Forbes looking for win number 1. That black number 07, the Noah Yoder Ford machine from Bryan, Ohio. And a couple of other cities there on the extreme western edge of the state.
When Todd first came to ASA, he did a little bit of driving and turning some wrenches, and they put somebody else in the race car thinking maybe stock car racing just wasn't his bailiwick. But a couple of seasons under his belt now, and suddenly he becomes a serious contender for an AC Delta Challenge Series victory.
With Jay Sauter and Mike Eddy about to catch the leaders, Todd Forbes finally passes Tim Steele for the lead as Steele starts to fade as both Sauter and Eddy pass him. Tom Harrington was also in contention at this point. Unfortunately, we have another time skip as laps 138 to 174 are not on the footage that I have found of this race. According to other footage that I have located regarding this race, which will also explain which crash in this race was the infamous crash and why, pit strategy resulted in a jumble up of positions up front as Gary St. Amant now leads when the footage resumes. The footage resumes under a caution caused by John Freeman spinning out again. Debris was also on the track, resulting in this guy running on track to get it. The restart was on lap 179. Gary St. Amant leads Bob Seneker, who was now second. Mike Eddy, who was third, caught Seneker, and they battled for second. As that was going on,
tuned in looking for other programming. A yellow flag. We have a spin. It's Jerry Foyt in corner number 1. St. Amant gets another break. Once more, a fuel-saving yellow flag comes up with 16 laps to go. This race could be falling into Gary St. Amant's hands.
Absolutely another break for Gary St. Amant, because if he's again able to get a good jump on the restart, he seems to get great restarts, Larry, and Seneker does not. I think you're going to see when we do go green that Eddie will make his move as soon as we get back to green front.
And for Foyt, by the way, even if the tire doesn't appear to be rubbing, which is quite unusual, even though he now will have to drop back to the tail of this field, it's not going to hurt him because he was the last car in the lead lap anyway, so he did not lose his lap on that incident. Let's take a look here and see if we can tell what happened, but Jerry may not be losing out. Oh, he gets inside.
Dave Anspaugh's car
Dave
number 37.
Oh,
whoa, what a move by Brad Loney.
Was that Loney? Yes.
Yeah.
Gracious.
Amazing. Well, and if Gary St. Amant hangs on for the win, I would strongly suggest that he go to the Jerry Foyt pit and say, may I take you to dinner, young man?
And I was also going to say to the people who perhaps have tuned in for other programming, they need to stay here, because if Gary St. Amant visits Victory Lane, it's going to be human drama.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Another driver with multiple issues all throughout this race. Jerry Foyt, for some reason, tries to pass David Onspot on the wet grass and spun himself, and Brad Loney barely avoids him. The restart was quickly after that, with less than 15 laps to go, with fuel becoming a concern for Gary St. Amant. Steve Holtzhausen and Tony Raines, who still has smoke coming out of his car, have a great battle for position. David Onspot has an engine issue and pulls off track. That may or may not have caused issues on track, resulting in a caution coming out again. The last restart was on lap 196, with Gary St. Amant getting a good restart. Gary gets into the dirt trying to get away from Bob Seneker and Mike Eddy while they race for second. They both tried to catch him, but ran out of time as Gary St. Amant wins. Meanwhile, Donnie Zwiefel and Dennis Vogel have some sort of bizarre incident on the last lap. What exactly happened was never explained. Anyway, Gary St. Amant celebrates what is proclaimed a surprise victory. So yeah, this was a weird one, between the weather crashes, drivers having multiple issues, time skips in footage, and a surprise winner with a crazy pit strategy. That being only pitting on lap 17, and somehow going 183 laps on fuel on a 5/8 mile track, basically going about 114 miles on a tank of fuel, which is 14 miles longer than most anticipated even going on a tank of fuel in this race. I guess it really was a surprise win on what was a very long day for the ASA series. But that's not why you're here. You want to know which of these crashes in this race is the most infamous crash in ASA history, and why. So, none of the crashes seemed that bad. All the drivers were okay after the wrecks they were all involved in, and went on to race another day. How could any of these crashes be infamous? Well, dear viewer, there's a lot more to the story. So, which crash from this race did you think was the infamous crash? Perhaps the last one because of Donnie Zwiefel hitting a pole in the infield and there's no replays as to how he even got there? No. Perhaps Jerry Foyt trying to go through the wet grass and spun out as a result? No. Was it a crash that was not a part of the available footage of the race? Good guess, but no. So it most certainly had to be the big wreck between Tim Fedewa, Glenn Allen Jr., and John Freeman, along with Mac McClellan behind them, right? Wrong. So what was it? Well, I assume most of you who have been on this channel long enough figured out almost instantly that the most infamous crash in ASA history was the crash between Scott Hansen and Johnny Benson. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. But how could that wreck be infamous? It wasn't intentional. It was clearly a pure accident caused by a brake issue, and Johnny was completely fine, as the footage clearly showed. Well, the reason this crash is infamous is because of a replay of the crash that the broadcast of this race did not initially show. See, I also just so happened to find the 1992 ASA Year in Review special. What that special has that the original broadcast did not is a full-on replay from Johnny's onboard camera. The broadcast only shows Johnny's onboard after the crash. It does not show his onboard when he hit the wall. Now, I've only done this twice before ever, for both Eric McClure videos before showing 2012 Talladega. But here I'll do it again. I'm going to issue a warning before I play this clip. This clip is not for the faint of heart. Yes, it's true that Johnny was completely fine after this wreck, despite what the clip tries to say. That doesn't match the footage, by the way. But it doesn't change the fact that this crash looks absolutely horrifying from the perspective of his onboard camera.
One place in 1992 that wasn't too good for John Benson Jr. was Cayuga Speedway, a place where John Benson took a hard hit.
The Players Limited Cup kicked off its series within a series at the Cayuga Speedway with Johnny Benson Jr. for the third race in a row on the pole. Tim Steele has begun an incredible streak of 10 top 4 qualifying runs in a row. But being on the pole was not necessarily the place to be, as the brakes on Scott Hansen's number 53 failed and gave Johnny a ride.
Now, in this shocking replay, you can see just what an impact with a wall at 110 miles an hour does to the human body. Benson is in pain.
Yikes! This onboard camera shot is the footage that has been used in basically every auto racing safety report ever since this crash happened. Prior to the NASCAR portion of his career, and despite the fact he had won the previous 2 ASA races before this race, that crash and the onboard footage that came with it is what Johnny Benson was most known for. Even Cup Series drivers during that time knew of him because of this crash. It has even been used by the developers of the Hans device, and it was even used in the Earnhardt report.
I would like to show you an example of the type of motion that I'm talking about. This is not a great quality video, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. It's the best copy we have. It's a copy of a video that was made in which Johnny Benson is driving a car. We thank him for providing this. It makes an impact to the wall, not a big impact to the wall. He ended up driving the car away. It does not have the kind of damage. But here he is. Here's his helmet. Here's a side support here. Hands on the wheel. Here comes the hit. That's not a big hit, but did you see that he moved in response to that motion, or in response to those forces on the car? This is kind of a still frame from the video, but you can kind of get a sense of the helmet, and if you can see, he's kind of doing what I did in that crash test. Your head doesn't just rotate this way. It rotates this way and roll, but it also yaws, and you end up looking towards the floor, and the helmet is moving further than he is. His hand is off the steering wheel. And as he comes back, the helmet, even in a full-face helmet here, is displaced even still as he comes back at a point that is still displaced with respect to his head and not lined up with it.
I do recall, even at 10 years old, watching the Earnhardt Report, or at least some variant of it. And if I did see that part that featured that replay, I would have blanked on that onboard replay being Johnny, because the Earnhardt Report was done prior to Johnny becoming one of my racing favorites. My first time really registering him to that crash footage was on a 2005 episode of Inside Nextel Cup during a Speed Fan Q&A segment. One that I recorded because, now with the sport being more safety conscientious by that point over 4 years after the Earnhardt Report, I was amazed that Johnny survived, let alone was uninjured.
Car in Indianapolis wants to know what it's for. This is for big impacts to the right. It keeps your, the headrest obviously is going to do its job. Some of the seats got a lot longer. Tony chooses to use the window net there also. In a heavy impact, your head doesn't go way to the right.
And we have some good video of you, Johnny Benson, having
that problem
ever. And I wish we could get that in the back room and roll that during this part of the show, because I think it'll show you the seriousness of some of these crashes.
And we must say that a lot of this came from Dale Earnhardt's wreck, so his death was not in vain. All those protection things are because they studied that wreck and they found out that you fly to the right and it really, is unsafe. So the net keeps you from going outside the car.
Outside your seat.
Outside your seat. Some of the drivers were literally trying to come out of their seat with their seatbelts very tight.
And as you've probably guessed, Johnny has talked about this in interviews as well.
1992, you were involved in a crash while racing ASA up at Cayuga Speedway in Canada, and you just so happened to have an in-car camera that day, and I mean, it showed you stretched all the way across the race car. How badly were you injured, or were you just sore, or was it?
I really wasn't hurt at all, I mean, yeah, you kind of do that little stretch. Oh, yeah, kind of. But nobody's ever seen a film like that.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I had people. I think they were out of Texas. I think they were doing something with the safety stuff and with Hans and all that.
Yeah.
They called and says, "Can we use that video?" And I go, "Absolutely." And I think I don't know about that today, but for many years, NASCAR still uses that to show people that what can happen. But right after that had happened, or not right after that happened, when I first came down here to run in the NASCAR scene thing, I remember Neil Bonnet coming up to me and he goes, "Man, that film that you're talking about from Cayuga," he goes, "I used to tell my guys I got in a wreck," and he says, "I hit my head on that halo bar up there, and they all thought I was nuts." He says, "For years," and he was just like, "I'm telling you, I hit my head." And he says, "The minute I saw that film," he goes, "I brought it to the shop and I showed the guys." He says, "I'm telling you, I hit my head." And so that's amazing footage. And I don't know if there's anything else similar to that would really show people how far we were behind on safety.
Now, you said that the Hans people got in touch with you about it. Did you know, wasn't it used in conjunction with the Dale Earnhardt Report?
Yeah, absolutely. But it was used before that too, though. But
yeah.
It was definitely used in that. And the Hans has been out forever. And I remember Kyle Petty using it, and it was such a massive piece that they think at that point in time, and people are uncomfortable getting in and out of the car. So whoever made that next step with being able to get it to the size that people could use it for and utilize it. I remember the first day I used it. We were at Talladega and got hit, and I got turned going into 3, and I'm going head on into the wall with it. And that's the first time in a race car I go, this might hurt, because we're running at the bottom. It's going to take you a couple of seconds to get there. Normally you get a fraction of a second before you hit.
Yeah.
3 seconds is a very long time. And I remember I go, this is really going to hurt. And I remember hitting the wall. I remember coming off the wall going, oh my God, that wasn't so bad. Well, the next 7 guys that hit me probably wasn't so good. But I just remember that first impact, and I've never gotten a car without that again, ever.
When was that? What?
Well, that would kind of when they first. It would have been it had to have been in 2000s, I think, when they.
Okay.
I think when they started running. I remember I was with 10 cars, so it might have been right at that. Okay. They had the Hutchins device and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the first time that I was able to get a Hans, And Bob Labonte was the one that was adamant coming down there. So you need to get one. I says, I can't find one that fits. And then he gave me the direct number to somebody, and I got one for that weekend. And that was the day that I needed it.
I was reminded of that video. We talked to Kenny Wallace back before Christmas, and he was talking about an accident, and he said, yeah, I hit my head on the C-post. No, you didn't hit your head on the C-post. Johnny Benson might have, but you didn't.
It's a long ways away.
Yeah. I said, no, you wouldn't be here if you hit your head on the C-post.
I wasn't expecting to find the race this crash was connected to, but I did. I never even knew what race it was until I started looking up 1990s ASA races, saw the crash, and Johnny didn't even crash that much in ASA. But then that 1992 year-in review special verified the race. I knew it was a 1992 Cayuga race thanks to NASCAR Man's X account with a post about it, but I wasn't sure which race it was. There was more than one ASA race at Cayuga in 1992, by the way. And even all these years later, even after all the safety improvements implemented into auto racing in general, this crash and the onboard replay that came with it is still one of the most used clips in regards to safety today. And now you know not only the auto race of origin, but the context after the race of the most infamous crash in ASA history.